And if they weren't, they are now. I did not bring, well, I'm not going to try to look them up. I'll do them from memory also. It had to do with proverbs, truisms, but proverbs in the greatest, widest possible sense, and which I guess we could say truisms. It's just more people are familiar with using the word proverb, because truisms, by their own definition, are supposedly that which strikes people prima facie, no further investigation needed. They just strike it as being self-evidently true. And the wide significance to which I was hinting is, in a real sense, all religion, all morality, civilization itself, the parts that were not physically based. That is, if you're not going to worry that civilization is paved roads, if you consider that civilization is, at its core, always an intellectual affair, then there, proverbs, provincial wisdom, maxims, the Ten Commandments, all of it are offshoots, all sense of morality, whether it be religious or not, but all of it is proverbial. And all of them, when they are really flying good, are truisms on this basis. And the news items I was going to bring up to you were two. And one of them said that it's harmless sport to make light, make fun of honored ancient proverbs because they're doing the same to you. The other one was, it said that a proverb which makes a person immediately nod their head in agreement is having at you. Also, well, okay, so I assume, I'm not sure everybody heard it that night, which is a British, from our English friends, it's a British version of putting you on. And everybody knows what putting you on. All right, now the thing is, and remember, we're not just talking about any particular proverb, and it's not on the basis that collective folk wisdom is nuts, because I am telling you, you could take all religion, all the commandments, all of the general sense of decency and morality, outside of religion even, and you could see it as being based upon proverbial wisdom, truisms, on this basis. Perhaps, and we could pull out examples as many as you could find. Well, we could do them forever. But a great one would be that honesty is the best policy. That is so good, that is, and before we get to the kind of basis, well, you know the basis is somewhere in hormones, having to learn how to talk. But that is so much of a truism, in the real sense of the word, that without any doubt you could be sitting there with your notepad, presenting yourself as a reporter, sitting at a prison, interviewing a convicted, a self-confessed thief, embezzler, burglar, a thief, and get to talking about his life and etc., and you in some way say, well, as my mother always said, honesty is the best policy, and the man will sit right there and nod. A man sitting there with a number, convicted thief, and he'll go, yeah. Would it almost not be the height of folly, if not inviting people to consider that you were insane, if you tried to take an ordinary person, just an ordinary person, and tell them, let's make it specific rather than the generalized statement I made about proverbs and truisms. So we took the one, honest is the best policy, and we started talking to a reasonable, honest, civilized, educated person, and told them those news items about all proverbial, all honorable, ancient proverbial wisdom is laughing at you, such as honesty is the best policy. And then you stop and you let the guy, his turn to dance. What would be the general populations at any particular time, because that's a very old idea, it's as old as man's talking, what would be their general reaction to that? Well, it'd be somewhere in the neighborhood that you're nuts. Even if they were not particularly religious, even if they were not extremely moral. Let's say that they were in the field of economics and bond trading. Maybe even an attorney or an accountant, for all I know. But they would say, because there's something in the human nervous system. You do not have to be Christian. You do not have to be of the Western tradition. As I said, you could be operating your life. You could be a convicted, confessed thief. And you do hear the validity of the fact that if you, just under general conditions, not accusing the man, but if you were just talking to this convicted, confessed thief, and you said something about, well, I bet it's a shame to be faced with 20 years. Well, you know, my mother, my grandmother. Everybody always says honesty is the best policy. The man will go, yeah. And of course, he's sitting there planning, you know, what robberies he's going to pull when he gets out. Proverbial wisdom, truisms of all sorts, be they religious or not, would seem to be, let's just take an ordinary, back to my ordinary, civilized, sophisticated man, it would seem to be of a nature, I'm just going to start using ordinary terminology. If we were ordinary, civilized, sophisticated people, we'd probably start saying something that perhaps there is something to Jung's idea of a collective consciousness or intelligence somewhere, that there is a wellspring in humanity that cries out for honesty and decency. Now, that may sound all right in Psychology 102, but that is primarily BS. And it's primarily BS on the basis that if that were true about humans, they would not need proverbs. If humans were civilized, they would not need civilizing influences. At the hormonal level, at the non-intellectual level, no matter what race, religion, nationality, sex, creed you are, honesty is not only not the best policy, honesty doesn't even enter into your policy making. If you were a human, if we could have it both possible ways, if you were a human with sort of the same conscious attributes you have now, and yet you not the same, you know how that goes. If you were a human and you couldn't think, and yet you could think enough to remember all this, and you tried to talk to a human, you tried to talk at the hormonal level about honesty, it simply does not compute. The closest thing to honesty would be self-preservation. And if you wanted to stretch it a little bit, if you wanted to look at this as being somewhat humanitarian, that honesty would be on the basis of protecting your offspring. And a man, he might protect the woman he was with, the female. You know, you certainly couldn't count on it. If she was pregnant, he'd probably protect her more. And that would be close to honesty. But if you tried to tell an ordinary man, how about a caveman, if we're going to play that stuff, he's still sort of a man, but he's not civilized. If you think, well, you can't think this, but put it rhetorically, if you think that in some way, at the hormonal level, that he would walk past somebody else's cave that's got some fresh meat there, and him hungry, and him not take a grab at it, on the basis, he refrained from it, but on the basis of, no, something stirs within my spiritual loins that tells me no. You know, that honesty would be the best policy. So, and as we will all assume that we're not favoring, I don't know why I say this kind of crap, that we're not favoring moral anarchy. Nope. I don't care one way or the other. I don't know why I threw in that. It's like trying to weasel out. I don't care. Try it another way. Philosophically, I was not trying to promote moral anarchy because it doesn't need much promotion to begin with. It was back to the real interesting, complex part. Is that the very things that would seem to be at the heart of civilization, and especially at the hearts of religion, decent morality, all senses of propriety, that the very things that ordinarily that you would just react to, that your nervous system would almost want to involuntarily nod, which is what that little news item was, that proverbs that will make you immediately nod your head in agreement. And it goes on, you must know that. I could make some comment here, you can be somewhere else, or watch another group of people, and somebody get up. Like the first time you ever heard it, and a man being entertaining, whether he be a priest or selling real estate or something, well, always remember this, no matter how much you want to succeed and how many shortcuts might be available, still remember this. When all's said and done, by God, honest is the best policy. And he's been up there for 2 hours talking about mostly shysterism and how to cut corners and kind of take your fellow man without getting caught. But he can get right to the end and holler something about honest is the best policy, and you look out the backs of the heads and people will go, including convicted, confessed thieves. So it appears to be just almost grounded in something beyond environmental, beyond cultural, beyond religious refinements, attachments. So let's agree that it might be. But then you're still left with what those two news items point out. That even if they're true, what are they doing? And an ordinary man say, well, they're pointing the direction to a higher moral ground. They're trying to lead man into safer, more civilized dealings with one another. The news items said that they were, as a matter of fact, having at man. Can you imagine being put on by proverbial, ancient, honorable truisms? I mean, it'd be bad not to be put on that you're in a bar and you walk over to somebody and say, aren't you that character actor, the one that used to have a bad eye? You're all in those westerns? And the guy goes, you say, are you him? The guy said, hey, we were just in town doing a little shoot. I was visiting my sister. Don't say anything. I just wanted to have a little beer. That's one thing. Somebody to put you on like that. But what if you found out that you were being put on by ancient wisdom? By great religious moral truths. Now I'll admit that that is kind of, sort of, or kind of, harsh to say that they're putting you on. But if you can, the idea of putting somebody on, as all humor at the normal level is, cannot generally be extracted from some degree of aggression and hostility. But if you could imagine being put on by somebody and there be none of that aggression, which you've got to be a little bit better than normal yourself to picture that, because putting somebody on is an act of aggression, which most jokes are. Meaningless in the ordinary flow of things, but if you can imagine being put on with no particular aggression, and I'll try and explain a little more what I meant by it. When I say that proverbs such as honest is the best policy, if you consider that a proverb, a truism, in some way is like an entity that had some intelligence, and then you take the news item, that thing kind of showed up in life and said, honest is the best policy. And since then, it's been like a flag periodically run up, people salute. It's been like a ship that periodically sails into harbor, people do this. They pay homage to it. If they don't think about it all the time, all that's got to be done is run out and the band play, or somebody go, let me tell you this, no matter what else you get from this tonight, no matter what else you do in life, you can count on this one thing. Honesty is the best policy. And all the thieves and everybody else will go, yes, no doubt about it. If you can consider now, for me to try to explain a little more, to say that it could be putting you on, and if you can look at it without the hostility, it's not putting you on for some nefarious purpose. It's putting you on the basis that where it's pointing is not where it's pointing. and what it's saying is not actually what it's saying. There was a news item tonight that may or may not be related that said that neurons forget. Oh, how quickly they forget. That neurons forget who taught them how to talk. Thought I coughed it off. But what if you could consider, I'm not sure that it's going to do much good to try to plow into it any more directly, but that all of the ancient wisdom, not just that one, but that just kind of wraps it up, because honesty is the best policy. It's all over the planet, on everyone's sandwich, it's in everyone's religion, it's in everyone's morality, it's in every recorded epoch of history. Cavemen writing on the walls, honesty is the best policy. And of course all the others that sprang directly from, as you should know, the original 10 Commandments had nothing to do with the Uniform Commercial Code. The first 10 commandments were not about thou shalt not plagiarize thy fellow writer's work. All commandments, all proverbs have to do with hormones. Thou shalt not screw, thou shalt not eat this, thou shalt not sleep over here. That's what all the commandments are about. Thou shalt not steal this. It's neurons having to deal with hormones. And the way that neurons can deal with anything is to talk about it. And of course, them knowing what a feeble attempt that is, one of the first things they did without knowing why went, wait a minute, that's not me that just said honest is the best policy. It was something greater than me made me say that. And this fellow caveman said, what, that doesn't make any sense. And the guy thought, well, no it doesn't, but and then he says, but can you believe I said that? And the other caveman went, well, no, I've never heard anything like that. Honesty is the best policy. It has a certain kind of rhythm, certain kind of poetry. And up until now, the most intelligent thing we'd ever said here amongst ourselves was, it was like, up until now, the height of sophistication had been a multi-syllable grunt. And now suddenly a man says, honesty. Honesty is the best policy. And when he tried to explain to this fellow caveman, when they went, wow, that is neat, heavy, right on, dude. Where did you get that? And he doesn't know. Anyway, you can see I was just trying to give you a very brief, possible alternative history of where religion came from. That and dreams of the subconscious and also myths, but particularly religion. But all of these pointed directly at human behavior, which would be disruptive if it continued our tempo, our pace, I should say, in a collective environment that we simply cannot be trying to forcibly engage with sex with every person of the opposite. Of course, that's mainly for men, unless there are any women rapists in the audience, and if so, I'll be available shortly after. But it had to do specifically with hormonal, is what I was doing the joke about. The first, the 10 commandments are not about thou shalt not steal thy fellow inventor's invention, thou shalt not plagiarize the chorus to the other guy's song. It's not about intellectual affairs. That's not what the 10 commandments are about. That's not what any proverbs are about. It has to get into the law, and it has to get into fairly vague areas, which is a pseudonym in the law for boring. Laws of contracts, bureaucracy, regulations, which are just hormones taken to a degree to almost bore people to the point that nobody's a threat. I know that got kind of obscure, but put it this way. You will not get raped if somebody is bureaucratic enough. Trust me. You can get raped by a priest. That won't necessarily stop them, but you get somebody far enough into the neural world, you don't have to tell them that honesty is the best policy, or, hey, don't you fool my wife when I'm out of the room. That's one reason everybody likes bureaucrats. I mean, you just never thought about it. They are just about hormonally, as they say in Alabama, worn out. There's almost nothing left at the hormonal basis. Enough to eat now and then, some pork rinds, and maybe go to the bathroom, and that's about it. Back to the attempted wider view. All of the proverbial wisdom, everything that strikes a person as being without any doubt to just yes, oh my God, yes. Whether I can do it or not, whether I disapprove of it, whether I feel guilty that I don't do it, it just seems patently undeniable. Who is going to say, what sane person, of course the answer is none to begin with, or I wouldn't ask. If you say, honesty is the best policy, do you agree or not agree? No sane person on this planet, translate into their language, and no sane person is going to go, oh no, no. Now thievery is a lot better policy. More efficient, shorter hours, all sorts of them. Of course, why are you laughing? Why you're laughing is because it's true. So now you see. But no one would stand up and disagree with that. If you said, we're going to have a vote, is honesty the best policy or not? Just tell the truth. It's not going to be held against you. Tell the truth. And not one sane person on this planet, out of 5 billion people, nobody's going to stand up, no sane person, and go, well, no, it's not. And do just what I said about all the advantages of dishonesty. But notice you all laughed. You wouldn't have stood up and done it if you'd been ordinary in those conditions, but you laughed. Why? Because it's true. It's obviously true. If you're going to get down to the level of what's the best individual policy, hell, thievery. It's no contest. You'd be an idiot to say otherwise. You should go out and work hard to buy something. When you go in there and you tell the clerk, is that your mother over there? And then you stick it in your pocket. That's the best policy. And of course, at another level, we all know if you're going to pretend to be sane and civilized, it's not. Not back to where we started. Do you get any idea why the news item will almost fly? That it is having at you? It's not making fun of you. It's not for some conspiratorial purpose that's detrimental to you. But to have people go, yes, without any doubt, honest is the best policy when you've already agreed. You did it by laughing. I didn't have to do the contest when I just said, what if we did ask? Is it the best policy or not? And I started doing the thing about one guy stands up and said, well, certainly not. This honesty is a lot more efficient. Takes no great training. You can save all kinds of time. Have more time to spend, call your mama. Go home and read the Bible, do other decent stuff. And you all laughed. Not because it was a joke. Why you laughed was, you realized, well, hey, that whole thing's phony baloney at one level. To say honest is the best policy, yeah, that's true, except for this. That's a joke. Not to ordinary people. It's certainly not. And if you tried to say it was a joke to ordinary people, it would be a very aggressive joke, and no people you'd get to laugh would be those that at least on the outskirts of civilization. You wouldn't want to be around them socially. Well, the kind of people who do end up in confinement, with the majority paying their bills and feeding them. But it is another, I was suggesting, prime example of the beauty and the innate efficiency of life itself is by it continuing to point man neurally, that is intellectually, in one direction, and it's to the point that the world is made up, the decent world, the civilized world, of self-evident truisms. By God, what greater truth can you put in fewer words than honesty is the best policy? Or love thy neighbor, or better yet, love thy enemy. We won't even bother going to those. Because you take the basis of all civilization, the basis of what seems to be all collective progress, and there is a sense, and you do not have to twist it, it's just you've got to be able to look beyond a two-eyed, two-dimensional, even three-dimensional, but a two-dimensional view, and to see that all proverbial wisdom, all of the various things that seem to glue moral society, civilized behavior, together, in one sense, is a joke at man's expense. Without the hostility, but it is sort of, without any hostility, it's sort of having at you. To say honest is the best policy. And everybody go, yes? When it's not at another level. And I don't mean some obscure level. It's not an operationally beneficial level to life, collectively speaking. But to put it very, very crudely, it's just an bald-faced lie. But a most necessary lie, if you want to call it that. So you don't see the humor? Well, you did a few minutes ago. I was doing this imaginary guy that stands up and goes, wait a minute, honesty is not the best policy. And him look around, out of 5 billion people, let's assume that 4 billion are sane. This one guy stands up when I call this worldwide contest amongst the sane and civilized. And out of the 4 billion, I say, let's settle this. Is honesty the best policy, or is it not? And one guy out of 4 billion stands up. I'm sure he'd wait a few minutes. And he'd look around. Finally, he might stand up, and I'd say, yes, you in the back, over there near Belgium. And the man would say, is this a joke? Are you guys in on this and I didn't know about it? You're asking, is it the best policy? And he'll turn around to the other 3 billion, 900 million, and whatever the 900. And he'd have to turn around and go, is this some kind of little joke that you guys are having on at me, that you're all pretending that's the best policy? What, did I just get here from another planet? Honestly, it's not the best policy. It may be the one you're operating under here, but how can you call it the best policy? What kind of term, what kind of definition do you have of best? Well, perhaps we shouldn't press on anymore, because that probably is already frightening some of the children and the dogs here in the audience. I did ask him to pull out several here, but all I can do is read them, but you might now see some. Rod Serling connection. Definition. Institutional religion. The intellect's attempt to make the natural trivialities of life somehow seem supernaturally trivial. A triviality of life would be what? Well, notice it says a natural triviality of life, to make it seem supernaturally trivial. A triviality of life walking past the other guy's cave, and there's a piece of meat laying there, and these guys' back turned. Again, if we could have it every possible way that you are no longer civilized in the sense you are now, and yet you're civilized enough to hear this, it is a triviality, a natural triviality, to walk past a cave and you're hungry. You're hungry. I don't have to explain anything else. And you look and he's not there. And you grab the piece of meat and walk on. That is just an outstanding example of a natural triviality to the guy involved. A natural triviality, it's life or death. You got to eat to live. What could be more trivial than that? And there's some meat. And you're going to jump out and say, wait a minute, is that your meat? His attitude would be, I'm eating it, ain't I? Who's holding it? And then you can start stuff like, yes, but how did you come by it? I've been over at the waist and picked it up. Why did you do it? I was friggin' hungry is why I did it. That is a natural triviality. How would you get people over that? Because it's obvious to live under civilized conditions that we cannot have that running rampant. The streets are already full of Martha and the Vandellas, and we do not need that sort of thing in the street. So what do you have to do with natural trivialities? You have to turn them into apparently supernatural trivialities, such as, listen, all you cave folks, honesty is the best policy. And they go, where the hell did that sound come from? Or when it was, Elmer in the other cave that one day went, instead of multi-syllable grunts, went, honesty is the best policy. The whole thing is so astounding, it is so unnatural that it was, you don't have to stretch your imagination to see how people came up with the idea of God. It is so it is so unnatural. It is so beyond the naturally trivial that what are you going to make of it? Like, I can't steal? I mean, what the hell steal? And then they got to explain to each other, well, don't take, if you didn't actually catch that meat or that woman, then leave her alone. And you go, Jesus. You have to make the naturally trivial apparently become supernaturally trivial, extraordinarily important in a trivial way. Because all you've got to do is see what religion talks about. I mean, it's important for the collective benefit of civilization, etc. But as far as what they talk about, they have taken the natural trivialities of life and turned them, apparently, into supernatural trivialities. And everybody forgets where it came from. Wait a minute, this is a triviality. It's far beyond writ large. It's a triviality turned into a gigantic burlesque. Look up burlesque. That's better than satire. It's a little bit different. Completely out. Well, I'm still going to read those one more I like. Collective intelligence, temporary help on a permanent basis. Which is also what we're talking about. That is what all proverbial wisdom is. That's what all collective intelligence is. It's like stopgap measures, except they've been going on 6,000 years. It's temporary help. Well, all right, we'll go along with these commandments, or we'll go along with this idea until we come up with something better. And nobody notices, we've been dragging our feet. I'm just being crude now and speeding it up. But we've been going along the same path, people in general, for 6,000 years, but it's on the basis, well, we'll hire her just for the weekend. It's been the world's goddamn longest weekend. It's 6,000 years. And connected to it was the last one I pulled out. Was an item of just how justice works. It was from the desk of. And it says the only reliable measurement of human intelligence would be, the only reliable one, if tomorrow's IQ test could be administered to those who died yesterday. Now, that's the only way it would work. That is, if we could take all those who's already died and help pay for that weekend help of hiring that woman, or that man, hiring that information, that thought, and they hired her temporarily. And they died yesterday, and I give them the test. That is, the test I'm telling you now was, hey, somebody should have fired you years ago. Now, if they died the day before yesterday and you gave them the IQ test coming up tomorrow and they passed it, now we got somebody serious. We got somebody who can think. Albeit he's dead, but at least we could measure it. We finally got somebody who can think, because you can't give today's IQ test to somebody, and if they pass it, it's too late. And of course, it's obviously it should go without saying that if you gave somebody that died yesterday the IQ test of yesterday, it's too late. That's why it's safe being dead on that basis. But if you gave them today's, it proves nothing. Because they can go, oh yeah, well if I'd lived another day, hell, I'd known that. There are people that died in the 1500s, the same thing. They say, oh sure, if I'd lived another 493 years, I would have known that. Don't a reliable measurement be if you could administer tomorrow's, whatever the hell it is, what would be a suitable, appropriate IQ test that's coming up tomorrow, whatever it is, if you could get that and administer it to people who died yesterday. And of course, the insinuation being they passed it, but at any rate, you would have then a reliable measurement of intelligence. Other than that, don't worry about it. There are enough proverbs to go around.